Welcome again to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Hello, listeners. Leading in high-stress environments has long been one of the gold standards of leadership, but it's actually something that very few leaders have the opportunity to learn, and even fewer truly excel at it. My guest today is David Hollenbach. He's a US Navy veteran, a former battalion fire chief, and current expert on leadership. So he's perhaps one of the few people in the world able to speak with experience and authority about how to get the best from people in high-stress conditions.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate you being here. And I think the best place to start really is if I shut up and give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell the listeners about your career background. As impressive as it is interesting, I've no doubt. And it'd be great to hear more about what you've achieved and what drives you and how you've ended up doing what you do today.
All right. Well, that's quite the tale. But first, let me say thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you and your listeners. I was born to a sailor. My dad met my mother on a Navy base in Orlando, which is where I live now. He was in the Navy in the 70s, and he met my mother. She was working in the Navy Exchange, which is like a department store on the base. So they met, got married, had me. I was born in the Navy hospital in Orlando, and grew up in Central Florida. After my dad got out of the Navy, he went into the fire department, and my mother became a nurse. They ended up getting divorced when I was 5 years old, and my mother had primary custody of me and my younger brother. We grew up in the house. We stayed in the house that my mom and dad bought when he got out of the Navy. You know, I remember sitting on my first fire truck before kindergarten, so I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. And I don't know that I actually have the memory of it. I've seen pictures. But, I remember sliding down the pole at the fire station and going to training events that they had. And so my dad had this great career in the fire service. He actually spent 40 years in the fire service, 2 different fire departments. Actually, I'm sorry, 3 different 4. Geez. Started off as a volunteer firefighter, got hired on with a small city department, and from there went to a much larger county fire department, which is the department that I later got hired on with and spent the bulk of my career with. When he retired from that department, he ended up going to the state fire marshal's office, which is like the law enforcement arm of the fire service. They do investigations and that sort of thing. And he was an arson investigator. And when he retired from there, he apparently didn't like retirement and went back to the fire service and worked for several more years with another large county fire department, not the same one, and retired. And I believe he's enjoying his retirement now. We live fairly close to one another, but that was really what led me to my career choices. When I finished up with high school, I joined the Navy. After going to college for a little bit, joined the Navy, actually broke my leg in the Navy and was medically discharged. So my naval career wasn't all that chock full of excitement. Just, went to some specialty schools and never actually made it on a ship, unfortunately. This dream of traveling the world with the Navy just really didn't come to fruition. But after the Navy, I went back to school, got my associate's degree, majored in fire science, and then went on to the fire academy, volunteered for a fire department in South Florida, and then later got on with the department I talked about that my dad worked for. And that was in 1999. Really, it was the department that I grew up in, and I really had a great deal of ownership for that department and worked my way up through the ranks from firefighter to engineer, which is the pump operator, the guy that drives the fire truck. Later promoted to lieutenant and was in charge of my own fire station. Was in that position for about 6 years and then promoted to battalion chief. And the first 3 years of that position, I was the chief of special operations, where I was responsible for all of the training and, the more technically advanced incidents that occurred. Was responsible for rebuilding our dive team because it had been dismantled early on in my career, and years later got charged with rebuilding it, which was an awesome experience. And then just some really cool experience in that position. And then later moved back into operations, where I was responsible for 7 fire stations, and they ended up realigning the battalions and added a battalion so that everybody's responsibilities were compressed a little bit. And I ended up having 6 stations that I was responsible for, a couple of those being special operations stations. And in a fairly busy part of the county, I've seen a lot of pretty horrific things, and ended up struggling with PTSD because of a lot of the calls that I had responded to and worked on throughout my career. And, really seeing the nasty side of humanity. If you don't take care of your mental health when you're seeing that kind of stuff all the time, and even when you are trying to maintain a healthy mindset, it's still very difficult to not allow those types of events to have a negative effect on your mental health. And with the culture of the fire service, and really most male dominated occupations kind of have this culture where you don't admit to any kind of weakness or something that may be viewed as weakness. Especially in my positions in the fire department, I was the person that fixed problems. I was, in my mind, the expectation was, I was there to help everybody else. I didn't need help myself. That would be admitting a weakness, and then therefore I wasn't fully capable of helping others, which is nonsense. And I like to, nowadays I like to tell people that may be struggling with PTSD that it's much like, putting on the oxygen mask in a plane. If there's an emergency, you got to first help yourself before you can help anybody else. And if you're struggling with the effects of post-traumatic stress, it's hard to recognize those needs in anybody else. And, I know that I worked with quite a few people throughout my career that were struggling, and some of them unfortunately committed suicide. And I came very close to becoming one of those statistics after I left the fire service. In my last year of employment with the department, I had really been struggling and was making some poor decisions in my personal life that ended up bleeding over into my professional life. And I ended up being terminated. And so, for 23 years, I had worked in this field. That was my identity. I was really good at it. I was very well respected in my mind. And I think in the minds of most people that knew me, I had created a very good reputation, and that all went away with some poor decisions in my personal life. And I found myself no longer being a fire department leader, a chief officer. I was now just Dave, and I didn't know what that meant. So I had this identity crisis and severe depression. Went to a really dark place, and thankfully I got the help that I needed and continue that work today. But I felt like I needed to really dig deep, and I had been a student of philosophy for most of my adult life, and I had been teaching leadership for 12 years. And here I am without that identity anymore, and I was just really struggling with, I've been teaching all this stuff for so long, and I haven't been living it. Felt very hypocritical, and just really hadn't been living up to the standards that I had set for myself or the standards that I had set for others that I led. So I had to really dig deep and figure out, what was really important to me, what was going to keep me going now that I wasn't in the fire department. That led to my book and the podcast, From Embers to Excellence. The book started off as a leadership book. I started writing it in 2010 after the death of my brother. It was something that I was very passionate about, leadership development, and I felt like I could add some value to that arena in the fire service. And I was writing this book for years, and I would put it away because I would get frustrated and, have that imposter syndrome. Like, who would read this? I really, you second guess yourself. I haven't really achieved anything worthy of somebody reading my work. And that was nonsense. I had achieved quite a bit. However, it would have been much like any number of leadership books, just, theory, philosophy, maybe some experience, but it was really focused on doing everything right. This is how you want to be, blah, blah, blah. And I really didn't talk about the mistakes that everybody makes, the mistakes that I made, the lessons that I learned. And I've found that the most valuable lessons that I've learned in my career all stemmed from huge mistakes that I made. Looking back, when I was responsible for holding people accountable for mistakes that they made, in some instances, I was kind of hard on people. And then in other instances, I was fairly understanding. And that, I would say that was later on in my career when I really wanted people to make decisions on their own. When time was of the essence, I wanted them to feel comfortable making decisions, even if they weren't exactly sure. If they made a mistake, we could address that at the time, but not making a decision could be detrimental. Being able to have some grace for people that were trying to do good, I think is key to leadership. But in that same vein, you've got to have grace for yourself. Can't be so hard on yourself. You have to take those experiences of failure, even those ones that are embarrassing, that you are ashamed of, that you feel like, you should have known better. I do know better. Why did I do that? That's so stupid. And you can hold that negativity surrounding that. You can hold that for forever if you so choose, but it doesn't do you any good. And it can taint your approach to other things. So the best thing, I think, is to learn those lessons and accept the fact that you're now better for having gone through that. And I say, it's better to be refined by those experiences rather than be defined. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody screws up. And history's greatest leaders have all made some horrendous mistakes. It's those individuals that learn from those and move forward and actually didn't allow themselves to be defined by that one moment in history, but went on to make great things happen. And that's what those people are known for. And you have to really do some digging to find those mistakes, And so that's what I want for myself. And that's what I want for the people that I've taught, coached, and led, is that we all make mistakes. You have to allow yourself to develop further and become better for having gone through that. And if we're able to even if it's just helping somebody up off the ground after they've crashed and burned and tell them that this isn't it for you, you've got more fight in you. Let's keep pushing forward. Like I said, the best lessons that I've learned have all come from really poor decisions, big failures,
Probably all learned that, haven't we, over our lives? It's like with pain, isn't it? It exists to teach you something at the end of the day. I don't want to cliche it and reduce it too much, but that's what mistakes are for. That's how you learn to be better. If you go through your life and never make a mistake, then you've not really learned anything.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful lesson for leadership, for life in general. But wow, what a story. So 2 family businesses there almost, Navy and firefighting.
Yeah. And
incredible.
It's kind of cool that I actually did follow through and finish my book. There are some leadership lessons in there. I talk a little bit about philosophy, but mostly I wanted it to be an authentic telling of some of my stories and, the struggles that I've gone through, some big mistakes, and hopefully it'll help people. I feel like it has a lot more meaning. It is something that I'm very proud of. I like the fact that now that I've done it, my dad is like, I think I'm going to write a book. So now I'm kind of leading the way,
Oh, that's awesome. You talked a lot about your mistakes, obviously, and what there is to learn from those. So what would you say has been your biggest professional challenge?
Well, there would be categories,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So as far as leadership goes, I think it's easy to get caught up in the ego part of it. When you are successful and it seems like everything you do is, coming together the way it's supposed to, you're developing others, they're succeeding in the things that they do. And, there's a great deal of respect for the things that you've been doing. People talk highly of you, the recipient of several awards and accolades. And I'll say this, I know that there came a time when my ego got in the way, and it felt like, I could do no wrong. And, I have this saying, be humble or be humbled. There's always somebody better. And when you don't practice humility, life has a way of knocking you down a peg or two, And I think your judgment becomes clouded when you feel like you're, at a level above everybody else, It's an easy trap to fall into. Be humble or be humbled is one of those valuable lessons. And really, leadership is not about you. It's about the success of the people that you're leading. You have to work very hard at developing yourself so that you can add value to the people that you're leading. I talk about that in the book. I use a term called selfish altruism. And it's essentially, you're adding value. You got to work very, very hard. You commit to a level of excellence so that you're setting a good example, but you're also doing that so that you're better able to add value to the people that you're leading, and you lift them up. You want them to, achieve more than you are. I think that is the true measure of a good leader. Another valuable professional lesson, and it's one that I speak about, is, in male-dominated occupations and organizations, especially when it's very top-heavy with men, there can sometimes be a culture that is exclusive, where the contributions of women that come into those organizations, it's not valued to the same degree as men. And I think that's detrimental to a high-performing leadership team. When you look at the importance of emotional intelligence, there are a lot of key factors. And the skills that I taught most on in the fire department was communication skills, empathy, self-awareness, the ability to develop good relationships and maintain those relationships. Those, that creating trust. And there's just all these levels of emotional intelligence that up until I was working on my graduate degree, I really had never heard of emotional intelligence. I just knew that these were all the areas that, really needed to be shored up. And then when I started learning about emotional intelligence and how it's measured in the different areas of it, and that these areas that I had been focusing on so much are areas that women tend to score much higher than men in. It kind of made sense to me that, okay, well, that, and we're trying to get women to act more like men in order to be valued to the same degree as men. You're eliminating a lot of their strengths from the equation. You're telling them, quit being so essentially empathetic. Take charge, be more macho kind of thing. And that's, I feel like that minimizes the effectiveness of communication. And so I feel like it's very important for strong male leaders to step up and advocate for women and recognize the value that they bring to the table. And it's not that men need to be more feminine or women need to be more masculine. There is an equal role. Whether you're male or female, you need to embrace the feminine and the masculine side of emotional intelligence to be well-rounded and as effective as you possibly can be.
Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think particularly in kind of the corporate world, there's this sort of traditional idea of what good leadership looks like. And it's all of the same kind of things that you'd associate with sort of the male ego and that kind of behavior, isn't it? It's the assertiveness, which usually means being rude and not listening. And it's the word strong as well. Again, it's someone who's decisive, i.e. they make snap decisions and don't listen to input of others who may well know better. None of those skills really are usually associated with women and the way that they naturally behave in the workplace either. And so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? And I think you're right. It shouldn't be about one or the other. It should be about kind of the best of both.
Right.
And I think, I'd like to say that a lot of industries are getting a lot better at that, but who knows? Maybe it's too soon to tell.
Yeah. I'd say it's too soon to tell. And unfortunately, in my experience, and this is looking through the lens of the fire service, when women come into the fire service, they're already viewed as, the weaker sex, and they've got to work twice as hard and show up 100%, 110% every day, where that same expectation isn't there for men. You're expecting excellence from both, but when a woman makes a mistake, it's because they're a woman. When a man makes a mistake, it's, maybe he's having an off day, or, maybe the training wasn't as effective. They need more training, maybe more mentoring, that kind of thing. But that same allowance isn't there for women, by and large, in my experience. And that's unfortunate. And so I feel like asking women to step up and say, hey, something's wrong here, you're holding me to a much higher standard. That's a big ask when they're coming in and they just want to fit in and be a part of the team. Going against the grain and going against the norm and trying to change the culture is, really like upsetting the apple cart, and they're going to get smashed down when they're the minority of the group. So I'm not saying that women shouldn't try to do that, but they need to have some advocacy from men that have come before them that are well respected, to step up and say, things really need to change, and to hold other men accountable for, any misogynistic behavior. Can't continue to go on like that.
No, absolutely. It's, there's some parallels with some industries I've worked in. Aerospace, for example, is certainly in this part of the world, it's notoriously male dominated. I've had arguments with people working in that industry when I was there as well about, why why are all the decisions in this business being made by old white men? We've got plenty of candidates, plenty of very well qualified people who aren't in that category. Why are they not being listened to? And the argument going back and forth on recruitment as well. It's like, well, I'd love to hire more women, but they're not applying. Yeah, well, why not though? Is it because they perceive it as this male-dominated place where they wouldn't be welcome, so they don't want to be there? And what do you do about that as well? And
it falls on the men to really change the culture, because they're the ones running the culture. They're the ones that have created and sustained that culture. And this is what I've seen in the fire service as well. They've made great strides in recruiting and hiring women. They've done more hiring of women in the past, 10, 15 years than they have ever. But they're not retaining them because the culture hasn't changed. Like, why would they stick around if they're not going to be valued, and if they're really not seeing the levels of success that men see? And really, when you look at it, there's women that are more qualified, higher educated, and they're being surpassed by men that just fit a certain profile, like, I'm a macho guy, and maybe more aggressive. And what I've seen, statistically speaking, men will go after a promotion when they only meet maybe 60% of the qualifications, but they're going to go for it because, hey, I should. And women tend to hold off on going for a promotion until they meet all of the qualifications and they feel like they've mastered those qualifications. It's unfortunate. Men that are less qualified go after it and get it.
It's the confidence versus arrogance argument, isn't it? And back to ego again. I don't know what you do about that as a recruiting manager, though. How do you? It's a tough one.
Comes down to the leadership of an organization. The leader has to see the value in it and work very hard towards changing the culture. And it has to be, a bottom up and a top down approach. It really has to be kind of a vice grip to change the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I didn't think we were going to get into that sort of topic, so that was really interesting. Changing tack slightly then, what achievement are you most proud of in your career? What's the thing that really stands out, if there is one? Maybe there's many.
The fire department, it gave me a lot of opportunity to help people, and really being in leadership positions allowed me to work with people in their professional growth. And looking back at many of the people that I've led and seeing their success now is a good feeling. I feel like I played a role in that. I have an amazing daughter. She's 15 years old, and she's achieved quite a bit. She's just an amazing young woman. That's another success that I'm really proud of. My book, it's already been up for a couple of awards, and I'm really hoping that people go out and buy it and find value in it, because I am very proud of it. And now currently going around and speaking to organizations really about the importance of advocating for women in leadership positions in male-dominated organizations, the value that women bring. It's really more about that holistic approach to high levels of emotional intelligence and leadership. I really believe that what men and women bring to the table, there's stuff to learn from both genders, and it can only work to improve the level of emotional intelligence in everyone involved.
So let me ask you to tell us a bit more about the book then. So I believe it's called Fireproof, Your Grand Strategy for Transforming Failure into Fuel for Your Future. So did I get that right?
Yep, that's
good research, me.
Yeah.
So what's the book about then, and what inspired you to write it?
Well, I talked a little bit about it earlier. Really, there's leadership lessons in there. There is just my authentic accounting of some of my fumbles. There is action steps at the end of each chapter, because I walk people through developing a strategy for their life to achieve what they see as a worthy goal for their life's work. And there's ways of really distilling what is important to you, and really identifying those things is important, because there's all kinds of sayings out there, but you have to know where you're going to be able to set a course, and then really setting small goals that lead to bigger goals, and really you have to set that final destination and work your way back from there, and recognize that there are so many different paths that can get you to where you ultimately want to end up. And having that awareness that when you meet an obstacle in your way, if you can't find a way over it, under it, around it, through it, maybe that's not the path you need to be on, and that's okay. Attaching your identity to an occupation or a career field can screw you up if that career ends. So having that openness to accept different paths while still holding true to your purpose and to your values. I look at who I am and who I believe I've always been. The fire service was just my expression of that. It really wasn't my identity. It's how I felt. That's what I thought my identity was, but I still help people. I still help develop people. I feel like the things that I'm doing now, it's still saving lives. The whole grand strategy part, let me digress a little bit. The grand strategy part came from this idea. I was reading, I've always read a lot of leadership books and philosophy, and I came across this program, the Grand Strategy program at Yale University. And it was developed so that young leaders that will at some point later on in their life may end up being in very high level leadership positions in government or the military, that sort of thing, or large corporations that can shape, global affairs. If you don't look back at the mistakes and the successes of strategists throughout history, you may be making the same mistakes over and over again. So to have those tools, being able to be analytical about situations that may arise and really have those tools that you're at the ready so that you can implement them when faced with certain situations. I was like, there should be some plan. There should be a strategy for my life. And I started working on that. I was like, wow, this is pretty good. So I should share this. And so it ended up in my book really as an afterthought. It wasn't really the driving force, but it added so much value to it and really helped everything come together. So I feel like I'm missing a part of the question. Did I answer everything?
I think so. Maybe what inspired you to write the book originally?
Well, yeah, the inspiration came from me losing my job and really having to dig deep. It originated, after the death of my brother, when I started writing a leadership book, and it was just, I'd went to this really dark place, and he left behind a young son, and I wanted to be able to set an example and say, look, these are some things that I've accomplished. But when you look at the life of your father and the things that just naturally came to him and how he was so amazing with people, and he had this great sense of humor, and he was just full of love. And I wanted to really, open up a dialogue for later on when my nephew was older, and maybe ask questions about his father and say, this is the stock that you come from. This is who you are. And if I've been able to achieve these things, the knowledge that your father could have achieved so much more than me tells you where you come from and what you're capable of doing. And so that was really kind of the original inspiration to writing the book.
Wow. I'm sure he's got something to look forward to there, hasn't he? If he hasn't read it already.
I don't think he has. I gave him a copy, but I don't think it's really a book.
How old is he?
He just turned 14.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely for the future then.
Yeah. He probably was like,
I'm sure it's on the shelf somewhere. Yeah. So something else I wanted to ask you about, actually, so in your journey so far, so you've worked in the armed forces, the emergency services, and now I guess you're in the private sector, really. What are some of the differences and the similarities that you've noticed across three very different kinds of workplace, if any?
Well, definitely the structure. I'm an entrepreneur now, and I really only answer to me and my customers. And it's very small because it is just me. But in the fire service, there is a rank structure, and there was people that I answered to, and there was people that I led, and then there was the citizens that I served. In the Navy, there's a rank structure. There's people that I answer to. There's people that I led, and my peers, and then ultimately the service to the country and the country's interests. That was, I think, the common theme throughout that is service to others. For me, that early lesson of it's not about you, it's about them. It's all about adding value to others, whether they're above you, whether it's you leading them, or whether it's to the people that you're serving. Being the best possible version of yourself in order to add as much value to them is what's so important. And I think that's what will ultimately drive the success or failure is, how hard you work at adding value to others.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. And do you think there's cultural differences in those kinds of organizations, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the military. When I was in, it was there was this authoritarian aspect of it, but the really good leaders knew that they had to work hard at developing their people. So there's that contrast, because ultimately anybody in a leadership role could say, go do this. And the expectation is that you would go do that without asking any questions. That's your job. You just do what you're told. I hate that. Like if I don't know why, it's going to be kind of hard to get, full buy-in from me. And I think that's the case with most people. In the fire service, it's really kind of the same thing, just to a lesser degree. When somebody is directing you to go into a burning building, that's your job. And, it's best to develop the trust in that person ahead of time. But, there were always times where either somebody that I had never worked with was the person telling me to do something, or maybe I was directing somebody that I'd never worked with to go do something. It was really, do I trust this person to accomplish the task that I'm giving them? I really don't know what they're capable of doing right now. So, it's really important to develop those relationships ahead of time if you can. But if they're in a certain position, there should be a level of trust and confidence in their ability. So when you do give them something to go do, they should be able to go and do it. The concept of leadership is universal, though. Good leadership is good leadership, no matter where you go, no matter if you're in the military, the fire service, public service of any kind, or in the private sector, in the corporate world. You can develop trust because of your reputation and, how you communicate with others, how well you respect the people that you're leading. And I mean, it's going to come back to you. If you're working to serve the people that you're leading, to make sure that they're successful and that they feel like they are valued, I think you're on your way, if not already there, being a good leader.
Great leadership is universal, and I totally agree with that. It's a skill that, everyone needs, doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing. I'd love to know whether you find more good leaders in, say, the military than you do in the private sector, because from the outside, my kind of perception of it is that it's more important in those environments, or it's given more importance by the senior leaders, perhaps, than it might be in, say, the average business. But I could be totally wrong there. That might be a completely flawed assumption.
I think that it'd probably be fairly equal if you dug deep, because there's poor leadership in every organization. And I think in the corporate world, poor leadership is going to be discovered, and if it's not profitable, they will be weeded out. And unfortunately, sometimes poor leadership can show profits in the short term, and it can be rewarded. But ultimately, I really do believe that in the long run, good leadership will always prevail, and the poor leaders will be weeded out at some point.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that as well. Yeah, it's not always been my experience in places I've worked, let's say. Let's leave it there.
Yeah, I agree. And I just, there's some instances where I'm like, man, at some point, it's got to come around to get them.
Yeah, well, maybe it will one day. What would you say are the top 3 mistakes that you've seen leaders make?
Well, I've made all of them, and I've seen them made. And it's a lot easier to be critical of the mistakes that others make, and harder to see it when you're doing it yourself. But micromanagement is one. You really have to develop the trust. People need to trust you, and you need to be able to trust them. And micromanagement, to me, points to an insecurity on the leader's part. Either they're insecure about their own abilities and they focus on the things that they know they're strong in and they're like nitpick the hell out of them, or they don't really trust the person that they're giving direction to, because that person, maybe they haven't worked together long enough to really have that kind of relationship. That really, the micromanagement piece can deteriorate relationships right out of the gate. So I think there, on the leader's part, there has to be a concerted effort to develop that relationship, sharing expectations and figuring out the person's abilities. And if their abilities don't meet your expectations, then it's your job, your responsibility to get them up to speed. And it has to be done in a way where they know that you're working towards their success, their professional development. You're working towards making them better for them. And if you can develop that relationship, I think you'll see good things. But micromanagement is the one mistake that I think it's not a good tactic, and it really deteriorates the team. The ego, allowing ego to rule decisions or actions, can be pretty detrimental as well. That idea that it's all about me. Look at how great things are doing. And there's so much written about it because it is a common mistake. But feeling like everybody that you're leading works for you and it's their job to make you look good, it's more important to own any mistakes that the team makes. That's your responsibility. And any accolades need to be given to the people that you're leading, the ones that are actually doing the work. It might be your ideas. It might be your professional development that got them to the point where they are capable of doing that. But ultimately, they're doing the work. And if you want them to keep doing that high level work and delivering that, you should provide them with the accolades and show them how much you value them, because they're the ones that are getting the job done. The other thing, I would say, early on in my career, I was like any other macho guy coming into the fire service. I was young, and a lot of the comments that were made by instructors early on in my career was, women were screwing up the fire service. You can't have the most highly effective team if there's a woman on your crew, and that's nonsense. Believing that gender has any role in a person's ability to do a job, that's a huge mistake. I've seen very small women that I think, just from a visual point of view, you'd say, oh, well, that big guy over there will do, so much more on the fire scene than that woman. But I've seen very small women work circles around some of the biggest, burliest firefighters and continue working. They're capable of, maybe not the same degree of heavy lifting, but it just means that they got to go back and forth more, and they're less likely to get injured. Whereas men with the macho mindset, like, I'm big and burly, I can do this. And I've seen a lot of back injuries, a lot of injuries that, had they worked a little smarter, probably would not have injured themselves.
Yeah, it's three good ones there. Micromanagement in particular, that's one of my pet peeves.
Yeah.
The way I've always listed it is like, why have a dog and bark yourself? It's like, if you think that you can do the job better than the person you're paying to do the job, stop paying them to do the job. You're wasting your money, if nothing else. But it's a funny one, that how how often it happens. And
Mhm.
half of the managers doing it, I'm sure, don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's a really odd one to me, though.
Yeah. Well, it happened to me. Like I was in a position, I was the chief of special operations, and I was
Yeah.
on this particular operation where I was trying to micromanage somebody that had so much more experience doing the task that he was doing than I ever could expect to have. And I was like, I just wasn't getting the communication. And so I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure of my own, like, did I tell him what to do? Did he understand what I had directed him to do? And so I'm like talking way too much on the radio. And finally, a lieutenant came over to me and said, "Hey, I think he knows what he's doing. You might want to shut up so he can do it." And I was like, oh,
This is awkward.
Well, it was like, man, I didn't realize I was being such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And that was the moment when I was like, man, how many other times have I done this? And really kind of, okay, I need to really pay attention to how I talk with people. And, if I have any doubts that they know what I'm asking of them, I need to clarify that before they begin the task, because the more questions I ask, it's micromanagement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think anybody's capable of doing it. It's just the self-awareness piece. Because nobody wants to come across as insecure or, a pain in the ass. I don't think anybody sets out in the morning, I'm going to really micromanage the hell out of somebody today.
No, you're probably right. I think there's a fair amount of people out there who don't care if that's the way they're perceived. Maybe that's part of the problem. But
yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
That lieutenant did you a favor, though, obviously.
Oh yeah, no, he's an amazing guy for sure.
Yeah.
But like most of the people that I worked with in special operations were very high level performers, and taught me a lot. And I think that's another leadership lesson is being open enough to accept knowledge that you don't yet have, from people that you're actually responsible for leading. They come with their own knowledge and expertise, and sometimes they've got more than you. They just haven't moved up in the ranks because they like where they're at, and their value is being that amazing in that position. And you've got to utilize that and learn as much as you can from them. And it's just going to make you a better leader and a higher performer.
Flipping the last question on its head a bit then, what do you think leaders most often get right?
Mature leadership understands that the value is in the people. That's the biggest asset that any organization has. It's not the buildings. It's not the tools, the computers, the desks, whatever, the fire trucks. It's not the equipment. It's the people that utilize that stuff. And I think that mature leaders understand that, and will show how much they value the people that make up the organization. My favorite fire chief of all time that I worked for, he used to say, if you're a leader and you look back over your shoulder and there's nobody following you, you're just taking a walk.
I like it. Yeah. With all of your experiences, obviously leading in high stress environments is a pretty big part of that experience. And it's obviously going to have its own set of challenges, and more about that than the majority of people, I think. So what advice would you have to offer a leader who's finding himself in that kind of position for the first time?
I actually do a workshop on this, and so I'll try and streamline it for expediency. When I talk about leading in high stress environments, I like to give the example of maybe a large structure fire, a building fire, where there's, maybe just think of an apartment building where multiple units, multiple apartments are involved, and you have all these resources on scene, so many different moving parts, so many different things that need to be accomplished all at the same time. It's like conducting an orchestra and knowing at what point each piece needs to happen, and being able to communicate when you don't have line of sight with them and you're on one radio channel, and so there's multiple people talking. It can be very, very hectic. And then you add in the life safety aspect of it, where there could be victims inside the building that need to be evacuated. And conditions rapidly deteriorate when the fire has reached that phase of just free burning. So that's very, very stressful. Not only are you worrying about your people getting hurt, you're worried about the residents that may be unconscious or already dead, or, really need to get out. So, you don't want people jumping out of upper story windows to get out of the fire. That's just additional injuries. There's just so many things that can happen. And if you don't have the experience, it's very easy for your reptilian brain and your prefrontal cortex to just kind of separate. It's that the action of fight, flight, or freeze. You're operating in this mode of just reaction. You're reacting to a stress level, and logic is separated from that. And what can happen a lot of times is tunnel vision. You can be hyper focused on one detail that may or may not have any bearing on the big picture. And if you focus too much on that, so many things can get missed. So in order to re-engage that connection between your reptilian brain and your prefrontal cortex, where you start making good decisions again, there's a tool. Well, there's three tools that I like to talk about. There's the tactical pause, box breathing, and the CAN report. So we'll start off with the CAN report. CAN is an acronym for conditions, actions, and needs. So conditions, and this is the context in which I would use it. I would use it for myself, but I would also ask an interior officer, that may be directing hose crews to put water on the fire. It could be somebody that's directing rescue efforts, whatever it is. I'm going to be asking them for a CAN report. So just, Engine 63 Lieutenant, give me a CAN report. And they're going to tell me the conditions that they're facing. What is it that they're seeing at that time or feeling? Because sometimes there's no visibility. I've got high heat, low visibility. I need ventilation. The actions, we're progressing deeper into the building. It's getting hotter and hotter. We're flowing water. We're going to need another hose line. We're going to need ventilation. So the needs, more water, more ventilation. Conditions, high heat, low visibility. Actions, we're flowing water and pushing deeper into the building. The needs, need more hose lines, which additionally means more personnel. So more hose lines, more personnel, more water, and I've got to get crews to ventilate the structure. Ventilating the structure will reduce the amount of heat and increase the visibility. All right. Now I'm looking at the big picture. What conditions am I facing right now? I've got fire in the third floor that's progressing to the west side of the building. I need crews to cut that off. Okay. These are the crews that I have moving into position. What needs do I have? Do I need additional resources? Do I need additional crews to be dispatched to my location? What resources do I have right now that I can deploy to achieve this? That can be useful in our personal lives as well. When we're in a stressful situation, what are the conditions that I'm facing? What actions have I implemented already? What needs do I have to make this situation better? And it's pretty simple. However, if you're under a whole lot of stress, you might not even think to ask those questions. You've got to take that time to reset the connection in your brain. And it's as simple as, if I was at the command board, in front of this building on fire, and I recognized that I was too focused, like maybe I'm not even hearing the radio, it's just I'm not receiving the information that's coming to me. As soon as I recognize that, I need to take a step back, maybe 2 steps back away from the command board. It has the effect of really opening up your field of vision, which helps your brain reconnect. The box breathing is another way of getting recentered and bringing yourself back into the present moment to be able to see the big picture. Box breathing is, and again, I would take 2 steps back away from the command board, breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, or a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, hold that for a count of 4, and do that 4 times. And it takes roughly 60 seconds. 60 seconds can seem like an eternity when you're under that much stress. But the ability that it gives you to bring yourself back into the present is so much more beneficial than staying focused on one detail and not being able to see the big picture. Those are some important tools that I've used, and it's very helpful in your everyday life.
Yeah, I guess they're sort of pattern interrupts, aren't they, that kind of make you take that pause and consider it. I have heard of box breathing before. It's interesting. It seems to come up a lot. And I know fighter pilots are taught that as well, and like special forces guys and things. Yeah. So it obviously works because it's getting more well known.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure it was like a book that I read written by some special forces guy. I've read a lot of those books, and I'm almost certain that it came from one of those books.
Yeah. But it's definitely effective, isn't it? And it's, yeah. I'm going to move on to the final question. And this is always one of my favorites because I get some really interesting answers to this one. So I call it Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick one person, whether they be alive or dead, past or present, or real or fictional, if you like, you may prefer to keep it in the real, who, in your opinion, perfectly embodies leadership, who would that be and why?
Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. He served as the Roman Empire, or the Roman emperor, from like 161 to 180. 19 years he was adopted, and just how he led himself and how he respected the people in his kingdom, and just how he approached life and self-leadership. His duty and respect for others, self-restraint. He's viewed by so many throughout history as one of the greatest emperors. I think when people talk about the Roman Empire, like the 5 good emperors, and he was one of them. I think he's like the last of the great 5 emperors. Even Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, and he's often studied. He's actually one of the authors that is studied in the Grand Strategy program at Yale. To have people throughout history view a certain individual as a great leader, I mean, you got to kind of lend credence to that. But just, reading his meditations, seeing what he viewed as important, it was clearly, that idea of service to others, that the people that he was leading was more important than him, and by taking care of the whole, he benefited from that as well. And he understood that. And I think that has served me well in times when I've been wondering if I was doing things right, kind of compare myself to him. And that's a high bar.
Yeah, no question.
And sometimes it's hard to really look at yourself in the mirror when you've just been comparing yourself to that person. But I think that's my number one leadership hero.
Yeah, no, it's a good pick, and it has been picked before, I must say. But yeah, I mean, he's widely well regarded, and I always find it tricky with historical figures, though, because there's so much lost to time, isn't there? We've got some of his writings, and I think some of them were unfinished as well. But I do wonder, because his son was Commodus, wasn't he? Who was, I think, one of the most notoriously horrible and cruel leaders in Roman history.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about Roman history, but from what I do know. So you wonder whether was Marcus Aurelius actually that good, or was he just that good in comparison to what came next?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question,
tell, isn't it? I guess we've got his writings to go on, and they are some pretty good thoughts on leadership. I do agree there. Yeah.
Yeah. You would think, though, that if he was such a great leader, maybe his son would have been better.
Well, who knows? Maybe he put all of his efforts into leading his empire and neglected his family life. Maybe that was why. Who knows? You never know.
Maybe it was just mental illness. Maybe his son just lived too cushy a life, and who knows?
Yeah, well, sadly, we'll never know for sure, will we? It's too long ago. But no, it's a great pick, though. I do like that one. Well, I think we're almost out of time. So, last thing, just if there's anything that you want to point listeners towards about how they can work with you, where they could get hold of your book, for example, please feel free to share the details.
Yeah, my website is hollenbachleadership.com, HOLLENBACH, leadership.com. My book is available on there in the Fireproof bookstore. It will be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the online bookstores, and it should be in bookstores all over the world.
Awesome.
To work with me, I do coach. I do speaking engagements. If you'd like me to come and speak for your organization or an event, please connect with me on LinkedIn or any of my social media accounts, or just email me through the website, and I'd be happy to put together a program suited for your event. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. And I will put the links on the website address and everything in the episode description so people can find it easily and just click a button, because that's always easier, isn't it? Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, David. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you too, David. And, great name.
Yes, I agree, obviously. Yeah. If you'd like to learn more about what David does, I have put all of his information in the description so you can check out his website. Highly recommend buying a copy of his book. I will be doing that myself as soon as it's available. And if you want to hear more about my own approaches to leadership, again, you can find the link in the description. But please do visit the website and sign up at www.leadernotaboss.co.uk/sign up. And that's all for today. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. And remember, be a leader, not a boss.